Good evening, Timothy.
Good evening. Had a good evening last night. I plan to have another good evening tonight. I have a rehearsal, but I always enjoy such things.
Oh, well,
Um,
do tell.
it's I'm subbing for someone for a show at TVI on the 7th, which is Pack and Yowie. So that should be interesting. Um, but I have to learn a bunch of music, so I kind of have to be a
And
little
that's what you got
focused.
to, sometimes what you got to do.
Yep, yep.
The learning curve. Anyway, this is the Lydia and Span with Lydia Lunch, Tim Doll, episode 235. Even we
Whoa,
don't believe
whoa.
it.
Well, learning curves. I don't. Connor Paget of Alabama thought he had to learn the hard way. He was at a New Year's Eve party. He saw this giant vase and he thought, that'd be cool if I crawled into it. And then, of course, he got stuck. It was basically like a giant vase with a head coming out. And it was like some one that was kind of valuable. So they didn't know what to do. But at the end of the day, they did have to shatter it with a hammer because, well, it
how
wasn't good.
how much of it, how much of him was actually lodged
Oh, I
in
think
that uncomfortable position? What an
quite a
idiot.
bit. I think he was pretty
Yeah.
drunk, so he was pretty malleable in his drunkenness. As you know that I think you've heard this. A lot of people have heard this with drunk driving accidents. It's often the drunk driver is one that lives, and the other people don't because you're so you're like a jelly that you actually don't crack in half. It's kind of a
Oh, so he was a bit gelatinous,
yes. I would say
therefore.
that's my theory. That's my theory. I could be way off. I have other stories you want to go on, or should I
No,
go into
no, go
that?
ahead because I'm just trolling for something
Yeah.
here.
So what's interesting is
I'm a bit under the gun right now because I've got a lot of things that are boiling like tiny piranhas floating around my
yeah.
head of
Okay.
need to complete a mother
Oh
freaking
yes,
deed.
I know how that
So
is.
I'm hunting. Go ahead.
So yeah. So I don't know why this happened twice recently.
Do tell.
Almost identical stories. One was in Southern California, and one was in Indiana. People driving on the highway,
Right?
swerving out of the way to
Oh
not
no.
to not hit a deer. You got to fucking hit that thing, guys. I mean, you don't want to hit a buck. You don't want to have it hit a buck and it goes right through your windshield. You kind of hit it to the side, but you don't swerve out of the way at high speed. You're going to lose control. You're going to go off the road. People die from that more from actually hitting the deer. So, and there's a lot of deer out there, so don't feel bad.
Very
So,
tricky. I mean, we did escape the similar fate because of
oh
your excellent
yes,
driving skills recently. So
yes. I mean, they those ones are tricky. A woman, I mean, I can't believe she's alive. She did that and fell 250 feet in Southern California down a canyon
in her car.
in her car, there for 4 days, collecting rainwater, living on it. No one could hear her, but it was someone trying to find a sweet little fishing spot. Heard her whimpering voice, found her. Couldn't believe she was alive. I mean, 250 fucking feet.
I
Uh,
mean, the rainwater saved her because I think it's after 3 days, if you don't have water, you're
oh
in
yeah,
pretty bad shape.
you're not gonna. Yeah, you got
Yeah,
it. So the rain. So pretty much identical. Indiana,
yeah.
another a guy swerves out of the way
Is
and I
Indiana the new Florida?
you can
The old
it
Florida.
will never be that. But it swerves out of the way, goes off the road, totally crashes the car. I mean, fuck that. He's lucky he's alive too.
Well, avoiding a deer as well.
Avoiding a deer,
Jesus.
and there's a roaring river and cars going by, so no one could hear him scream for 6 days. And
Oh,
and he lived on rainwater also. And it was just like the other one, two people looking for a fishing spot. It was a father son, and they were walking, and they're like, "Oh my god!" Because they saw a body, they see the airbags, and they're like, "We're gonna find a corpse." The guy touches the arm, and the person in the car turns around, and the dad almost has a heart attack there. He was like, "What?" He couldn't believe it.
so was the car? Was he in the car? The whole was.
Totally trapped. He couldn't get out, and his
Oh
legs were broken.
gosh.
Of course, they had to amputate one of his legs, but he is alive, and he's lucky to be alive. I mean that, but
I
he
mean, I don't know if you heard this story, and I've just got a bit of a fracture part of it because I didn't have time to investigate. But I heard about somebody jumping into the river to avoid a carjacking, but they got out of the car safely, just jumped into the river, which is
rivers are tricky. I mean,
It's insane.
You don't want to underestimate a river that can real. What was it? The Jeff Buckley, he dove into the Mississippi. Don't dive into the Mississippi River, folks.
I mean, if you don't drown, you're just going to become the toxic Avenger. Now, speaking of toxic avenging, okay. Yes. Scientists find, which ones I'm not sure, but we'll get to that. 90% of all burgers, steaks, chicken, and plant-based foods in the U.S. contain cancer-causing microplastics. Now, I mean, all right, we assumed, and we'll get to the water bottle problem in a minute. But so they studied, and they say that
90%
we consume about 11,500 microplastics each year from food. And yes, we should be shitting out credit cards. So, I mean, they tested everything from fish fillets, plant-based burgers, chicken McNuggets, chicken nuggets, and everything that they tested. And 90 different rubber particles.
Is this like processed pre-made food or even
no? This is just all kinds of food, and they think that it's being contaminated by the equipment being used during food production and distribution.
That would make sense.
Of course, the freaking packaging. I mean, even if you go to a health food store and you want to buy a freaking salad, a lettuce now, it's in plastic packaging. Yep. I really don't freaking get that. I just don't understand how they get away with that. To me, that's just insanity.
Well,
insanity. The samples that they took were broken down over 24 hours and soaked in a detergent to remove any remaining fatty materials. And so with that, all the protein products they investigated, 68% of the total samples, including plant-based and seafood, contained microplastics.
I mean, what's the industry that's really pushing plastics?
All of them, because that's what everything's put in.
The petroleum, the big one, the one that basically, this. I think we've talked about this. Everything on the planet that makes money, everything that makes money. No. Literally, I'm just talking about this. Everything on the planet that makes money, anything that can be sold, blah, 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 blah. You combine all of them and put it against petroleum alone, and petroleum dwarfs them in terms of how much money. So nothing is going to, well, except for the people potentially. Basically, nothing's going to really stop that industry from doing what they want. And boy, the wars, everything.
Really?
Oh yes. Well, I'm just keeping it going, Simon.
Amazing. Really incredible. The oil industry for me is just like one of those things. It's just like blows my mind every time.
Well, Simon, you saw that documentary Black Gold.
Oh yeah. If you watch that documentary, there's no way you cannot walk away without feeling blood-curdling rage towards the oil industry. I mean,
which documentary?
These people have committed a crime against humanity. End stop.
Yeah, Black Gold. It's and what's so insane, and you brought it up, Simon. These people, they have grandchildren and great grandchildren, and they don't give a shit.
They knew what was going to happen. They knew as early as the early 70s that this was going to happen.
They knew before that. And the thing is this, they realize they're going to die and go to heaven. So what does it freaking matter? Now here's another, and I'm always against this, Tim, and I always complain that I don't want fucking bottled water. In Spain, at least, they still put water in glass bottles.
Right.
So the average bottle of water contains 240,000 pieces of tiny cancer-causing nanoplastics, 100 times more than what was previously thought.
Yay! Yeah.
And the thing is, you let it sit in the car, you let it get warm, and it is even freaking worse. And the thing is, I mean, we are in New York and we have some of the best tap water supposedly in the country, but I drink the tap water, filtered or not, because I don't want to drink out of a plastic freaking bottle. Everything else is in plastic. Why that as well?
Also, we talked about this, and this was the great gaslighting of the 90s, the insistence of recycling. And it's like, wait a second, you're now making the environmental damage the consumer's problem. The consumer never asked for millions of fucking plastic bottles. That was basically forced onto us. And then now it's our responsibility to deal with this shit. fuck the fuck off.
Well, I have to find this article that I thought was interesting on edible coffee cups. Yeah. And there
interesting.
is such a thing, edible coffee cups. Nice to eat you, it says. They're tasty, crunchy, and fully organic alternative to disposable cups. I mean, the thing is, they can use potato, they can use all kinds of
Well,
things.
that's what. So the big one that everyone talks about is like, plastic straws not being ethical, and of course, the NPR liberal response is these paper straws, which, let's be honest, don't really work. The one that works, the one that works, is the noodle straw.
Exactly.
A pasta straw. That's the one they should
I had
do.
a noodle straw recently.
That's the one to use.
It was a long
Biodegradable.
rigatoni.
Yeah. That's the one that works. It doesn't collapse.
No, it's very sturdy.
It actually works. So speaking of eating, Cecil,
Eating or heating?
Eating.
I'm always
Cecil, the 7-year-old golden doodle, so golden retriever and poodle hybrid in Pittsburgh. This family had $4,000 in cash on their kitchen counter. Suddenly, suddenly it's gone, and they're like, "Wait a second, the dog ate
my money.
$4,000." So they had of course, that night at 2 a.m, I had a big.
Maybe there was cocaine on it, and the dog was just like sniffing and then ate it.
Maybe like cocaine.
I mean,
bear.
they claim that most dollar bills have hundos and 50s and a lot of,
Sure. So I mean, it's so the dog puked up a lot of it around 2 a.m. But basically, over the next 3 days, they had to follow it around, and it smelled really bad. They had to go through its shit and its puke. They only retrieved 3,500.
They had to go through
3,500. It still came. It went away with 500. They didn't get the whole $4,000 back. and what's so weird about Cecil? Cecil's actually really good. Doesn't like steal food from the. It was such strange behavior. He'd never done this before. So the whole thing's a mystery. They don't hate Cecil.
Well, and speaking of pooping, have you heard about? I mean, there's been a lot of, aggro on flights recently, but
oh boy,
there's been also pooping in the aisles. But this one is
Why?
really, I mean, I think this flight was a North Korean plane, and one of the passengers just shat in his seat, got up. The shit was from his middle of his back down, just trotted off.
A pumpernickel pancake. That's always such that act of aggression is always such a transgression.
Well, I mean, aggression, irritable bout. I have no idea.
But there was a British. This guy got arrested. This British banker, business guy, was New York to London. Definitely, maybe he was on some kind of Xanax and mixed it with booze. Something he was drinking, and he was just butting heads with the stewardess, and I don't know what they're fighting over, but it all finally came down to where he's like, he had a fight. It was quiet. Then he like rings for a service, like, "Oh, miss, you forgot something." So he handed back the tray with the dinner on it, and he had a giant fucking Lincoln log on the thing. Oh yeah,
what?
And then he was arrested on the spot, and I think I got lawyers and said he was going through stress or something, but he must have gone to the bathroom and then brought it back out. Like, I don't think he could. Although he was in first class, so I don't know.
Heinous. I mean, like, flying isn't horrifying enough. Now there's any number of, aggro or incidental poopers.
Let's the door that blew off. Anyway, we don't have to talk about that. that thing.
I'm sorry, but the door of my anus blew out, and I shat all over the fucking seat, and you got to suffer through it. I'm sorry. That's not me talking. That's Big Lou. Go ahead.
Well, no, that Alaskan Airlines where that Boeing, whatever they had to recall.
Loose bolts, loose nuts.
And they're on the incline. They're lucky they're at 16,000 feet, because if they're at the normal 35,000, that thing would have been like a bomb. It would have been a disaster, but no one died, right? So pretty amazing. But yeah, scary as fuck. I wouldn't want to be on that.
Well, I have to talk about this. I don't usually like to give any of these Kardashians lip service, but
correct.
Kourtney Kardashian launches a $40 vaginal supplement that claims to control odor, as if you could wipe the smell of shit off of that family. I'm not sure. And of course, she's just cashing in on not only insecurity, but I guess they're like vaginal gummies, but it has nothing to do with actually getting you high. There's no science behind any of it. And I guess if she's fucking Travis Barker, she probably has to douche every now and then. But this is just another scam by the
Yeah, snake.
super rich. I'd like to puke down her panties at this
So
point.
it is like this is like reverse snake oil.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, and it's just look, if you don't smell good down there, go to the fucking doctor. Don't go to Kardashian's house because I don't want to smell any of those fucking puss over there. Hello.
Yuck.
Hideous.
Anyhow, well, I guess we should maybe introduce the next guest, unless you have.
I mean, I'm sorry to segue with such a cantankerous, or should I say, cuntankerous
Right.
article that really has got me up in. Oh, I don't even want to finish. I'd say up in arms, but you know where I'd like to stick that arm right up there and pull the stench out. I'm just saying it up and down.
Oh, look out.
This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lounge, Tim Dahl, and curator, activist, general rebel rouser who is now attempting, with much work and many connections that he's made over the years, to try to bring through art some kind of peace and understanding with the conditions, especially that are happening between Colombia and Venezuela. Alex Brahim, Lydian Spin, episode 235. This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch and Tim Dahl, and our guest this evening, a friend of mine for a few decades now, Alex Brahim, a curator, social activist, general trouble corrector, if possible, who lives in Cucuta. I met him first in Barcelona many years ago when he was curating all different kinds of outsider shows. And welcome, Alex.
Thank you very much, Lydia. I'm glad to be here at the Lydian Spin. Hi, Tim.
Hi, good to see you, Alex. It's always a pleasure to be in your company. So
yes, it's always amazing to see you two guys. Lots of fun.
So did you
and lots of good discussions as well.
Of course. Did you so you're in town, you're in the New York area right now. Did you come from where before that? Because I know you're kind of a global citizen. You're kind of jumping around all over the place.
Well, I'm going to start by explaining what Cucuta is, which Lydia just said. That's where I live now. That's where I was born and where I left when I was 16 years old.
And in Colombia.
In Colombia, yeah. Yep. And where I returned 24 years after I left. And it's the main border city in Colombia, bordering Venezuela, which is at the end an epicenter of all kinds of struggle, as you might guess.
Yes.
Like a very hardcore border, also a very struggling place for the Colombian intern conflict. So it's the place where all the issues live, and where I live as well, and where I live too now.
Yeah, so yeah, it's kind of amazing. It's amazing. Like last time I was in Colombia, because there were some elections going on, and as Colombia's gotten more right wing after just the brutality of the last, since the whole war on drugs era of the 80s, and it's going more right wing, and every time an opponent challenges one of the right wing politicians, they always point to Venezuela and go, see what that looks like. Do you want that? Is that a fair assessment of what's kind of going on now?
Well, it always works. I mean, it would be a lie to say that things are fine in Venezuela, or that the Venezuela government has really provided development, social justice, and so on for their people. So it works very good, in terms of like spreading fear around, to show how it's right there with the neighbor, and to see, I mean, there are thousands and thousands of Venezuelans living in main Colombian cities, spreading all over the continent and the world since years.
Yes.
And most people who go from or enter Venezuela do it through Cucuta. So it's the main passing point between the two countries, and it's the main passing point for these huge exodus that the neighbor country has been living. And yeah, it works where the fear. And I might say, now we have government change, and we're still expecting to see what the changes are because so far it's been very hard to get there. There have been many alliances along the way, which have, of course, sort of contaminated the genuine spirit that might have led to that ideal of a change. And B, the so-called total peace, which is one of the main bets of the current government, is becoming a very, very hard to get achievement, because it's too many actors, and I have to say several of them, the main ones, are not really, or have shown to not be really interested in peace. So the government has to deal with the intentions that they have, but they don't have a true feedback for that. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Well, and it's right now, it's so globally difficult because there are so many refugees. There are so many people that don't want to be in the country that they're in all over the planet at this moment. You know what's happening in America. They're coming from many different places. We don't have the facilities to help people. We are the cause of much of the strife that causes refugees globally, everywhere. And it's just a tragedy. It's a global tragedy. And in spite of the fact that people need help, we're still waging useless fucking wars or endorsing war whores who are killing the cities, making more refugees, making more people that have nowhere to go, that are in desperate conditions with poverty, who just want to escape the violence in these countries.
Exactly. Well, it's all sort of set for that to work like that. And at the time being, Colombia is not only like a recipient, which is first time ever it had to like get a lot of immigrants. It's not only the recipient of the Venezuelans or the passing by point of some Venezuelans, but also a passing by point for people from so many nationalities. What's happening in the northwest of Colombia, at the Darien Gap, which is the border with Panama, you find people from almost all over the world there, like accumulating in order to go up all the way through Central America, and sometime end up entering the States, right? And these people come from countries like Haiti, like Cuba, so they've gone down to Colombia. They come from African countries like Senegal, like
China too, right? China too. I mean, right? Asia, and like the whole world's there, yeah.
They pass through Brazil and Venezuela and then Colombia and so on. And most of these people walk. So it's kilometers and kilometers. They're the walkers, the Venezuelan walkers, or what we have called within our research there, a new class, a new world class, like after the working class, the walking class, which is a full new epistemology on living in the world, right? Yep. And some people have done things like going back and forth 3 or 4 times, first alone, then to pick up their families, go there with them, go back, pick another member, go back from Caracas to Santiago de Chile, walking 3-4 times.
And this is what governments also have to realize, and this is what people in other countries have to realize, is they are not walking because they're criminals poisoning the blood of other countries, but because they are desperate human beings that want a better life for themselves and their children, which other countries have dangled in their face.
They're not just walking; they're also climbing mountains. I mean, Santiago
climbing mountains, swimming the Rio Grande,
Caracas. I mean,
it's not the flaneur kind of approach to walking, indeed.
No, not at all. And then, of course, if you go to the west of Colombia, as far as I know, I mean, that's the new trade route for illicit drugs. I mean, maybe less, used to be mostly via Caribbean, but now with how they're working with the Mexican cartel, it's coming up on the West Coast. And so what I've heard from Colombians is that environment, these steep cliffs into really dense jungle coming out of the ocean, is really hard for people to bust. I mean, it's pretty wild there. So it's kind of ideal if you're a trafficker. So over there's the West is pretty interesting these days, it sounds like.
Well, it is. And it's also got a very huge African descendant population. And it's been a main setting for the resistance and for the social movements that stand for the rights of the racialized people in Colombia. And it's also a place full of indigenous people. So it's all set to be a very struggling place where we have the main port of Colombia there, Buenaventura, which is a super hardcore place to live on a daily basis, but it's a place that moves millions of dollars every day, and people there struggle to survive. It's all very dramatic in terms of how huge the contrasts are between what goes on, like economically, like in a macro sense of it, like exploitation, like all the resources that Colombia has and so on, and how little it at the end gets to the people, or how little at the end it helps to overcome social injustice in the country. And it
now, Alex, let me just
the ruling class there doesn't give a damn.
No, of course not.
Sorry.
So I mean, coming out of a curatorial background, and we'll get to that later, but in the here and now, I mean, the job that you seem to have taken on in your foundation is so immense and so necessary. Can you tell us a little bit about the El Pilar Foundation and what you're doing there? What you're doing?
El Pilar Foundation is a foundation that my brother Luis, my sister Pilar, and I created once our mother died. It was 14 years ago. She was a Spanish woman who married this guy who was an Arab from Cucuta there at the border, but his parents were from Jordan and Palestine. So it's all been a back and forth history of migration in my family. I grew up without knowing who the other was, which is amazing, which is great. I will always thank God. And so she very much sowed the seed on us, which was like committing with social injustice and to always stand for the importance of education, pedagogy, arts, and culture as a main artifact for coexistence, for development, and for making life and people's life better, right?
Yes.
So,
Alex, no, because this is fascinating me, because, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is a beautiful thing about the Colombian culture. I feel like this does exist, this obsession with, it's very cultured, it's very literate, but it's also been a little cursed because of this, because when they decided to go against the United States, it's a very proud nation. And they're like, Iran has a little bit of that too. It's like, fuck you. We're actually, no, would you not say that? I mean,
the fuck you stand ship thing. Yes, of course. But here we're not really thinking about like, I go back to it. So we just had this idea of creating a foundation that would allow us to put together all the knowledge that we had. Yeah. My brother as an artist, as an educator, as a researcher, and me as a curator, as a cultural manager. He very committed to the landscape there for years, me in an international network, blending all this together, right? So we put these programs, which are very much a fuck off kind of thing, right? Like we're not gonna stand this. We're gonna do it on our own. We really believe not only in civil rights, but in the need of the civil society to intervene in places where the state is not doing things right or is not doing things enough, right? So that's very much what the foundation is about. So it's very much about setting up scenarios in which to intervene for making people's better, very much determined by the problematics that the communities have. So it's mostly co-creative process that we do with the communities, with the artists, and with our team at the foundation. And we come up with like methodologies or routes in order to overcome specific problems that they have, and how we do it through different methodologies, which are mostly led in which like the main curse is art or art experiences or art creation or art interpretation or so on. Going back to what you were saying, Tim, yes, it is true what you're saying, but it's not all of Colombia.
No, of course, it's a generalization.
I think like the country stood against America or so, but believe me, the country is now so polarized. Yep. You would even say there are, like in Spain, two countries. You've always heard, like this story about the two Spains. Well, you could sort of say the same about Colombia now.
And you could even say, because Panama was originally Colombia. And so that did separate completely, right? And I mean, France and then United States ended up kind of taking it over in their own way. But and that's very African, of course. And that's kind of, let's go back to the diversity.
Panama was created by the United States.
Right, exactly. But
At
France
the
was in there
at
at the very end. But it was Colombia originally, correct?
Of course, it was
Yeah,
Colombia,
course.
and they became independent in order to make the canal with the states.
Mm-hmm.
Alex,
but France started that, right? France started that, right?
Okay,
then,
Alex.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Art, which which we believe that art is the salve to the universal wound, which is why it's so interesting that the art that you were curating when we met in Barcelona, however long ago that was also outsider art. It was people that were on the fringe. It was like Bruce LaBruce. It was like Slava. It was a very outsider art that you were somehow able to force into more mainstream exhibition halls or institutions or museums. And then the job that you've taken now is so freaking immense.
Right.
And I'm just surprised your heart is not broken every day, because your power of resistance, acceptance, and insistence is amazing, my friend.
I know you know me. Thank you, darling. Well, it was very different then. And those were other times, and we were young enough, and I had a lot
have
of
fun,
energy.
to have fun.
I still have a lot of energy, but I used to have it more then. The thing is, I always try to combine like these B-sides from main artists among with upcoming artists, and was always so unafraid to put together different origins, different disciplines, different matters of interest, different scopes, different generations, which was something at that time in Barcelona, not everyone was daring to do. So we sort of created a critical mass of people who were interested and who were willing, eager to see what would be next, what could be there that was unusual, that was not expected before, right? So I think we sort of made an accomplishment with that, and we managed to work institutionally, independently, absolutely underground, and also with companies, with the private sector there, which was amazing. Nowadays, we do sort of the same with the foundation, but we do work with the communities, with the artists, and we work with both public and private funding, but mostly we work with cooperation agencies, which has also been a huge learning process, because the way they approach to things is quite different than the creative process in art. Even art research, might it be serious or bold, is not as technical as the sort of approach you have to have with these projects.
Well, and that's what's so unique. I mean, that's what's so unique about your talent and your genius, is that you were able, even with these very extreme artists, to find places that were maybe originally beyond their reach, and to find cooperation within either corporations, banks, institutions, or museums. And that is the part that most artists just do not have a comprehension of doing, because we just don't know how to do that, because it's so much frickin' work.
Well, it's annoying. People think that curating is something like, I don't know, choosing a few words you like in order to sort of narrate your stuff and then dress up good and be there with the vernissage and so on. But there's a lot of hard work behind it, especially if you're not like the curator working in an institution with a permanent budget and so on, but you're in the independent curator. There is this artist you might know, Mexican, living in New York since forever, Pablo Helguera, who's very well known for these artoons, he calls, which are like cartoons, like very critic about how the art world runs. He sort of says what no one dares to say in those cartoons. And he's got this amazing one in which he sort of draws different types of suicides. So he says, jumping off a bridge, A, taking pills, B, and becoming independent curator, C. So it's sort of a suicide act. It's a very gonzo kind of approach to life.
You're fucking gonzo, all right, honey bunnies. That's why I love you.
And how do I resist? I resist because I believe in what I do. I resist because achieving things in that order is what makes me feel alive. And also, I'm always trying to link myself and to thank both who were behind me, who were before me, my parents, which are the reason why I have this mindset. Thank you, right? My brothers who already died, and those who are alive. People like my sister, like you, who are my sister as well, and my ecosystem in Spain, in Colombia, in the States, in Argentina, which also allows me to go back and forth between different countries and to resist the hardness of being stabilized in a so hardcore space as Cucuta.
What's the
Wonderful.
population there? I'm just curious.
Excuse me?
What's the population of Cucuta?
1,200,000.
Oh,
I mean,
okay,
it's
huge,
not
huge.
like a small town or something.
No.
Tell me a little about the exhibition that we were talking about yesterday that was in Denver that was like voted top exhibition there of that year. That was involved with what you're doing now, but what was actually in that exhibition? What was it called?
Well, I'll tell you about it. It's not related to El Pilar Foundation. It is a show I curated myself. I was appointed to curate that show by the team at Museo de las Américas, which is the main cultural institution showcasing Latin America, Latino art and culture in the center of the United States. It's in Denver. It exists 30 years ago. It's not a huge institution, but it's a very well-known one. And it's a main one for that sort of scope. And they wanted to do a special show about Colombia and something that had to do with the peace process that took place in 2016 back then. And by the time the show finally happened, which was after the pandemics and all of that, right? That show was supposed to happen before the pandemic. We realized that that was sort of insufficient in order to show what the complexities of Colombia's violence is. So I created this show called Colombia, the Corn, the River, and the Grave. And it tells a small tale about the sacred land that the indigenous people inhabited and how death was also sacred to them and had a lot to do with the relationship to the land and with the growing of the corn, which was sacred also for them, right? And how the whole exploitation and the whole extractivism policies that have led Colombia's development throughout the years have, and the whole struggling violence with the narcos, with all the guerrillas, with the so many different agents intervening for so many different reasons, right? How death has become part of the landscape itself and is anything but sacred, right?
Yeah.
Yes, it's interesting. And you know, we're talking about that and the diversity, the ethnic diversity of where it is, you know, since basically colonialism, but also the diversity in geology. And I always assumed in order for like a place like Bogota to be maybe taken over by this Spanish, is because it's just such high altitude, and that suddenly starts changing. A lot of people who have never been to Bogota, they don't even realize that the climate is like kind of like almost like a San Francisco. It never really gets that hot. It never gets really cold.
It's a San Francisco, only you can't breathe because it's so high up that by 5 p.m. you're exhausted from lack of oxygen. But I think they say it takes 3 months to get accustomed to the
it does.
air.
What I'm getting at, Alex, is and all the peaks and valleys, just the landscape. It almost encourages more tribalism. Just by the way the terrain is set up and where people live, whether they live down in the valleys, in the jungle, or on the top. So, like, of course, these things are splintered. Also, I mean, am I wrong about that?
Sure. Colombia is a very diverse country, not only, I mean, topographically and therefore culturally, right, and now racially and everything. And that's sort of what the show displays as well. It's this natural diversity, but it's this violence being there in order to take things, right? No matter what the landscape is, no matter what the resource is, they'll find their way in any corner of the country to go for it, right? So, and we combine, like, it was sort of a window that opened up for people in Denver and Colorado to see what these complexities are. It was a blend also of main well-known artists, middle career, upcoming, 5 for the first time ever from Cucuta, from the border town with Venezuela, representing the country abroad. It was 15 artists in total, and coming from different places in the country. And it was declared as top exhibition in Colorado in 2023. Yeah, there was a very fine article first by Ray Rinaldi, who's the main critic from the Denver Post and from the New York Times as well. And he also made this top list of the 2023 exhibitions in Colorado, which started with our show, Colombia, the Corn, the River, and the
I'm remembering another show that you had put on in Barcelona. I can't remember in which museum, but which was all photographs. And I know that was, I don't know if that was an award, it was award winning to me, but it was a really huge installation of photographs. What was that? What was that installation about?
That was, I mean, like the things I deal with are like queer art, culture, and identities, migration and coexistence, violence and culture of peace, and historical memory, which has a lot to do with it. So that was a historical memory project with Ignacy Prat, a young Catalonian photographer and researcher, right? Who made this amazing project called The World of the Victors, in which he went after the list of the main responsible people for brutality and punishments during the Franco regime. And he went to different notaries to find like their dying official papers to see where they lived at the time they died. And he went all over Spain taking photos of these houses from the outside, you know, the facades of the houses or the buildings. And
of the last of the fascists, of the last of the fascists, yeah.
Exactly. So it's the list of the fascists, their houses, right? And it is at the end a visual culture study kind of approach to the Franco regime aesthetic and to power and aesthetic and architecture, which is a brutal thing. And he also displays it. I'm the curator of the show. We displayed as the salons that the Franco regime used to have to display art at that time. So it smells very oldie and very annoying itself. It's like entering this you don't want to see anymore kind of a Spain that still resists as well, to see how it was built and how it is there still. Because what's true at the end and what he found out on his research is that those powers that are behind those facades are still the powers incurs in the Spanish society and state and economy.
Well, and Alex, having where we met in Barcelona, and for some reason, the first time I went there, I knew I would go to live there, which I did for 8 years. It's interesting because where was I drawn to? And none of my friends had been there yet, which is still Belchite, which is, you know, the largest still existing in somewhat fashion Civil War battle zone that where Franco killed 6,000 of his own people. And I don't know what, you know, it drew me because I would have to go every year twice, photograph and do videos there. And I don't know what, and that's why that curatorial exhibition we're just talking about was so powerful to me, because the fascists, I mean, I went to Spain when supposedly fascismo was abated for a while. Well, it never is anywhere. It's always there under the surface, behind the fucking closed doors, or out in the streets, cutting people's heads off. So, but that was one of the reasons that I stayed in Spain as long as I did, because I just couldn't stop going to this place. And as haunted as it was, and it's so big that there's 3 churches there, 6,000 people were destroyed, was that there was only one church that was like the Cathedral of Tears. Every other part of it didn't feel so haunted except for one church, and everyone I brought there would have the same effect, like, oh, not this place. And you know, the juxtaposition of what Spain horribly has been and wonderfully what it is and can be was exactly what attracted me to it. The juxtaposition of the, you know, religious persecutions, the witch hunts, the fascismo, and then the Dali, and then the you know, and so many other artists, Buñuel, you know, the Sagrada Familia. I mean, all of it. That juxtaposition was so important for me to live there.
Well, juxtapositions are very enriching situations. And I think that's also one reason why I'm glad to be back in my hometown after so many years, and to be able to, like, survive all these layers together, and to see them not as something that is suffocating, but as something that Tim said, that's something that calls that fuck you inside of me.
we all got a bit of the old fuck you in us, don't we? That's why we're here. Hello.
Sometimes there's a little, there's filters and resistance and obstacles that bring out the fuck you in all of us, kind of sparks the flame a little bit. What do you find? What are some of your biggest obstacles you're finding these days with what you do? Is it bureaucratic? Is it government? Is it just
it's
general people?
It's all kinds. Funding is always first and biggest of the problems. I mean, like, for most of these kind of approaches to life and these kind of sectors, especially after the pandemics and so on, it's become a bit harder, right?
Of course.
So first of all, that to deal with the situation, with the public, with the state, it depends on, like, if you're dealing with the city hall, if you're dealing like with the state, if you're dealing like with the country, right? But it's also a very hardcore thing. But what I think is hardest is not to, like, draw people's attention or to accomplish something specific, but to maintain things running, to keep people's motivation up, to have people understand that certain things are not short term,
right?
And that if you are, like, really pursuing certain horizons, that's not gonna be a quick kind of thing, right? And
so in other words, Colombia, you don't work with hippies. You don't allow it.
Well, not really. Not really.
I know. I'm joking.
Not really. True. I mean, that's indeed, we've had certain kind of discussions about it, because at the type of work I do, like curatorially on my own, I can do like more flexible things. I can be more comprehensive towards certain specificities of the artist's life or lifestyle or needs or expectations, right? But when we deal with this, I don't know, USAID, UNICEF kind of funding, with these processes which are with communities, with very young people, with children, where you have to take very good care and be very careful about even the way you talk and the way you look, sexual harassment. I mean, a lot of things that
a lot of layers
take into account. So the artists we work with are those who are able to understand, which are not all of them, right? That a duty is a duty, that a deadline is a deadline, that a written project is needed in order to get the funding, and not just a name or an idea on a, I don't know, voice note or something, right?
But let's talk about some of your early curatorial things. Was Barcelona the first place you started curating exhibitions, or I guess so, because you left Cucuta when you were very young?
Well, I left Cucuta. I went to study and live in Bogota. I studied there. Then I worked as cultural journalist for some time. And then I left to keep studying in Barcelona. And while I was studying, I started just, working in production. The first job I had was getting equipment off a fucking trunk, right? Then I took good care of a door while they were entering the things and stuff like that. So those were like my first job in the cultural field after being a professional in Bogota.
Doorman, professional doorman.
Exactly. But I became very good friends with artists, and I started collaborating with them. And I really loved the curatorial job. Like, as a culture journalist, I had attended a lot of exhibition openings, a lot of guided tours with curators, and I was very attracted to that field, to that kind of work. So when I realized I was already curating my friend's show, so it was them who started calling me a curator. I took it seriously. I started curating. And after a couple, 3, almost 4 years of curating independently, I started presenting, like doing applications for, open calls for upcoming curators, whatever. And I won a very important institutional award in 2008 in Spain, in Caja Madrid, Inéditos, which is, it was very important then. It was like the thermometer of who are the curators to come. And that's where my institutional path started. And since
Well,
then,
and
I
one
have
second,
combined-
back to your curatorial journalism, which you started at. I mean, your writing is you have to amalgamate so many issues. I mean, I'm just reading the pamphlet from the El Pilar Foundation, right? You have to put in to so many concepts tightly and poetically, but simply understood. And you're really that's one of your major talents, my friend.
Well, thank you. I started marketing and advertisement, but then I did master's degree in visual culture studies, right? And I started a PhD program in visual arts and education. So that combined with also a high-speed but super intense education I had at the journalism school of El Tiempo newspaper back in Bogota. They have an amazing journalism school. That's given me the skills. And you know what? I even had to relearn to write for these cooperation agencies and so on since I started with the foundation. So it's like, I don't know, it's sort of a
Full circle.
wide range of tones I can use in order to say the same things, depending on who I'm addressing and stuff like that.
What were some of your most exciting or fun or even devastating shows that you put on in Barcelona? Because you also worked with, as I mentioned earlier, some extreme people, Bruce LaBruce, Slava Migotin, I mean, various people. And what were some of the highlights of that?
Well, I'll mention two highlights, which are Antigua Casa Haiku, a space that I was the artistic director to. It was the first project room for independent contemporary art that was funded by a private company, and that was in Barcelona. We also got, after that, public funding, and that's exactly the place where you performed twice and where we had the exhibition with people like Bruce LaBruce or like Karen Gary or like Yuki Dauda, the Japanese calligrapher from the Pillow Book, Pretty Green and with the Pillow Book, for example. And we managed to have a almost 3-year, absolutely delirious experience with the space changing itself every time, and every like 15 days, 3 weeks, we'll have something different. People would go there and the whole thing would be an absolutely new world to discover.
That was a great period and project. Yeah.
Yes. And B, you were there too. It was the opening of the Fabra Coats Art Factory, right? Which is an amazing, huge building.
Well, not only Bibi Hansen,
yes.
who I've performed with for many.
I mean, so many people. Karen Gary was there as well. Meneo was there. Arbol, like very, very impressive artists. Like all the community of the artists from Barcelona, coming from all different fields, from the very hard, cold conceptual work, which is main there, down to the very hardcore post-porn queer feminism.
And it was taking over a factory. I mean,
exactly.
the factory.
9,000 people, over 9 non-stop hours, 5 stages running at the same time.
It was immense.
That was very impressive. And it
Bibi Hansen cut the ribbon. Bibi Hansen cut the ribbon.
Exactly. You know, we had her cut the ribbon as the authority. She was the girl from the factory. This was an artist's factory now. So who would cut the ribbon? She was like the major. So she did. And she did a very nice reading of artist quotes while doing it as well. That was a highlight. That would mention those two.
I'm happy I was involved in both of them because they were certainly highlights for me as well.
Of course, baby. We've had a huge highlights together.
Of course you have. And
you've also had a couple with your team.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. And I've seen you both in action, and it's fun. Let me tell you.
We're not stopping, none of us.
When are you satisfied? When are you at your stride and you're like, okay, I got this. Everything's coming together. Because I've even had to book my own tours, and what a pain in the ass. But then you kind of plant these seeds, and when it all kind of starts coming together, there's some satisfaction there. I can imagine, right? When do you reflect and go, I'm really psyched to be doing this?
Okay, I'll tell you the last time I was fully satisfied. It was not so long ago.
Last night.
We just had an opening in Madrid at the end of November.
Yep.
At Casa de America, which is a main space for Latin American culture, or for all of the Americas culture in Spain. It's an amazing, absolutely beautiful palace, absolutely well located. And it's a very important place for, like, let's say, cultural / diplomat relationship. Diplomat relationship between Spain and the Americas. So we have an exhibition there with the people from Bienal Sur. This is a project that is run from Buenos Aires. I'm part of the international curatorial team there. It started as with the idea of becoming a biennial that would spread around different cities and countries, and nowadays is the most spread around cultural event in the whole world. We became part of it, part of the open call in 2016 with a project called Juntos Aparte, Together Apart, which is our main project for contemporary art and coexistence interventions in the migration issue at the border. And we make Cucuta, epicenter for the dialogue and for the discussion of borders and human mobility worldwide, with the presence of main artists and main thinkers from around the world in dialogue with our creators there and with the communities there. And it has accomplished a very important cultural narrative and border thinking that can take a lot to the world nowadays in the current global migration crisis.
Sure.
So there is this exhibition which was seen first in 2021 as part of Bienal Sur, as well at the National Museum in Bogota. And then it was seen at the Immigration and Contemporary Art Center Museum Muntref in Buenos Aires. And now it went to Casa de America. And what's in there? It's a selection of works that have been shown before in our 3 first editions, 2017, 19, and 21, back in Cucuta, where worldwide and local regional artists create a setting to showcase how the Colombia-Venezuela episode has been, what's happened there, and what the experiences of pain and resistance have been, and what the horizons and expectations are. And B, second chapter, which puts this Colombian-Venezuelan episode in a wider scope and lets us see how it's not sort of an isolated experience,
right,
but something that's symptomatic of what's going on around the world, and how it might take different kind of, there might be slight changes depending on whatever the ecosystem, the political reality, the beliefs, the ethnicities. But at the end, there are things that are common ground, and that allows us to create a brotherhood among who are part of the borders, or in the borders, or moving or in mobility worldwide.
Alex, what you are doing is so important, and more people should be inspired by the fact that art in itself is resistance. It can bring people together. It is the salve for the universal wound. Without it, we would all just die of hunger, literally. And it's just very important to try to bridge this ever expanding, same as it ever was, hideous gap between the warmongers, between the class system, and just between the other and those that have everything. So I thank you for having been not only my friend for many years and many to come, but having been on the Lydian Spin. This is Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and Alex Brahim, my brother.
Thank you, guys. It's
Thank
been
you.
amazing to be at the Lydian Spin.
Yeah.